A dark highway stretches endlessly into the night, the only light coming from the trucker's headlights. Soft ambient music plays in the background, creating a tense atmosphere. Voiceover begins, slow and steady. I've been driving long-haul trucks for nearly a decade, and let me tell you, there's nothing quite like the freedom of the open road until it starts whispering back at you. I'll never forget that fateful night on Highway 62, a stretch of road notorious for its eerie legends and ghostly sightings. It was late October, a time when the air is crisp and the shadows stretch longer than usual. I had just picked up a load in Nashville and was headed to a delivery point in New Orleans. The plan was simple: drive through the night, avoid the traffic, and get some good miles in before dawn. Little did I know that the road had other plans for me. As I emerged onto Highway 62, a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the asphalt ahead of me. The headlights of my rig barely pierced through it, and I felt that familiar shiver crawl down my spine. They say that fog brings with it something ancient, something that can feel your fear. I chuckled at the thought. Just a trick of the mind, I told myself. The ambient music becomes more foreboding. About 30 miles in, I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. A set of headlights flickered behind me, almost like they were playing a game of catch-up. The truck seemed to gain on me, but every time I looked back, there was nothing there. Just the same thick fog rolling in. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I was alone on the road, miles away from the nearest town. But the feeling of being watched crept into my mind, wrapping around me like the fog outside. I hit the accelerator, eager to leave whatever was following me in the dust. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life, sending a chill down my spine. Breaker, this is Big Red on Channel 19. Anyone out there? Got a situation here on Highway 62. I grabbed the mic, my heart pounding. This is Night Owl. What's going on, Big Red? There was a long pause, and then a voice came through, ragged and frantic. You need to get off this road. I'm telling you, it's not safe. I saw her. She's out here, waiting. My skin prickled at the mention of her. I had heard the stories of a woman in white who lured truckers to their doom. They say she appears in the fog, her ghostly figure beckoning you to stop. Those who do never make it back. I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it. You sure you're not just tired, Big Red? He continued, his voice low and urgent. No, man, I'm dead serious. If you see her, don't stop. Just keep driving. I lost a friend out here to her. Before I could respond, the radio went dead. My heart raced as I glanced into the mirror again. The headlights were closer now, bright and menacing, cutting through the fog like a knife. I could see the outline of a large truck, but it didn't look quite right. The shape flickered, almost like it was glitching in and out of reality. Panic bubbled in my throat, and I pressed down on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest. The truck behind me seemed to match my speed, almost as if it were taunting me. Get off the road! Get off the road! I yelled to myself, trying to shake the feeling of dread. Then, without warning, I felt a chill sweep through the cab. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath misting in the air. My skin crawled as I glanced to my right. There she was, a figure dressed in a flowing white gown, standing just outside the fog, her hair wild and unkempt. Her face was pale, almost luminescent, and her eyes were sunken deep into her skull. I gasped, the horror gripping me like a vice. In a moment of sheer instinct, I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding to a halt. The figure was now right next to my window, her mouth moving as if she were speaking, but I couldn't hear a word. It was as if the world around me had fallen silent. The music swells, building tension. Drive! Drive! I shouted at myself, and with a jolt, I threw the truck into gear, the tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away. The figure faded into the fog, but I could feel her presence lurking, as if she were tethered to my very soul. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over and check if I was hallucinating, but the tales of the highway echoed in my mind. Instead, I gripped the wheel tighter and focused on the road ahead, praying for daylight. The fog began to thicken again, swallowing my truck whole, and I felt the truck behind me close in once more. As I raced down the highway, I caught glimpses of the woman in white in the periphery of my vision, always just out of reach, always watching. I could hear her whispering now, a haunting melody that tugged at my mind. Help me, please. I shook my head, trying to drown out the voice. No, I can't help you. I screamed into the void. Just then, my truck hit a pothole, jolting me out of my daze. I glanced back, and for a brief moment, I saw the other truck, its headlights flaring as it swerved off the road, disappearing into the depths of the fog. Big Red, I muttered, realizing he hadn't been just tired, he had been warning me. As I pressed on, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle in my chest. The woman's voice had turned into a wail echoing in the confines of my cab. "You can't escape!" With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed the truck to its limits. The road began to twist and turn, each curve more menacing than the last. I could see the faint glow of a diner sign up ahead, the only beacon of hope in an otherwise dark abyss. I floored it, desperate to reach safety. Finally, I burst into the parking lot, slamming the brakes as I hopped out of the truck. I stumbled toward the entrance, gasping for breath. The diner was filled with truckers and travelers, oblivious to the darkness that lingered outside. I turned to look back at the highway, but the fog had rolled in completely, swallowing my truck and any trace of the woman in white. The old diner owner approached me, a weathered man with a concerned look. "You okay, son?" I nodded, though the fear still clawed at my insides. "I saw her," I whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "Don't worry about her. She only hunts those who are lost," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now." But I knew better. The road may have spared me for now, but the memory of that night of the ghostly woman in white would haunt me forever. The camera zooms out, capturing the flickering neon lights of the diner against the dark highway. I still drive Highway 62, but I never forget that night. Sometimes I think I hear her voice on the wind, whispering my name, reminding me that the road holds many secrets, some better left untouched. Voiceover fades out, and the screen darkens. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It was a chilly October night, the kind that sends a shiver down your spine and has you double-checking your rearview mirror. I'm Mike, a long-haul trucker, and I've been driving the lonely stretches of America for over a decade. I thought I'd seen it all, drunks swerving, deer leaping out, and the occasional truck stop freak show. But nothing prepared me for the night I encountered the ghost on Highway 76. I was about 3 hours into my shift, cruising along the desolate stretch of road known for its winding turns and heavy fog. The glow of my headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the asphalt ahead like a flashlight in a cave. My radio buzzed with static, and I fiddled with the knobs to find a decent station. Most were dead air or country tunes that made me cringe, so I finally settled on a podcast about ghost stories. Perfect ambience, right? As the eerie tales flowed through the speakers, I noticed something unusual in the distance. A flickering light off to the side of the road. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. At first, I thought it might be a car pulled over, but as I drew closer, I realized it was more than that. The light glimmered like a candle, swaying gently despite the stillness of the night. My instincts screamed to keep driving, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over, parking my rig just off the road. The light beckoned me, a beacon in the dark, and I felt an inexplicable urge to investigate. As I stepped out of the truck, the cool night air hit me like a slap. I walked toward the light, heart pounding in my chest. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was trying to hold me back. When I reached the source of the light, I discovered a small, dilapidated roadside shrine. It was adorned with faded photographs and flowers, wilted and forgotten. The candle flickered on a makeshift altar, surrounded by a crumbling stone circle. I leaned in closer, peering at the photographs. They were of a young woman, her smile radiant even in black and white. Beneath her image was a small sign that read, "In memory of Sarah, lost too soon." An unsettling chill crept over me. I had a strange feeling I wasn't alone. I looked around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the road was empty, just me and the flickering candlelight. Then a low whisper echoed through the night, barely audible but distinct. "Help me." I spun around, my heart racing. The air grew colder and the hairs on my arms stood on end. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response, just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I took a step back, unease settling into my bones. I should have turned around and left, but something compelled me to stay. I heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "Help me. Find peace." The voice seemed to emanate from the shrine itself. My gut told me to run, but I couldn't tear myself away. I leaned closer to the altar, half expecting to find some hidden mechanism or trick. Instead, the flame flickered violently, casting long shadows across the ground. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even more, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. The shadows twisted and swirled as if alive, and then I saw her. A figure emerged from the darkness, translucent and ethereal. It was the young woman from the photos, Sarah. Her eyes were wide with sorrow, and her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't quite hear. "Please, help," she pleaded, reaching out toward me. Panic coursed through me as I stumbled backward, almost falling over. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. "What do you need?" She pointed to the photographs, her expression desperate. "My family. They don't remember me. Help them remember." A wave of dread washed over me. I realized this was more than a ghost. It was a lost soul seeking closure. The stories I'd heard about restless spirits flashed in my mind. I couldn't just leave her here. "How can I help you?" I asked, my voice steadier now. Her figure shimmered, and the candle flickered again. "Find my family. Tell them I'm still here." Then, in an instant, she vanished, leaving me alone with the cold and the darkness. I stood there, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly 2 a.m. I needed to get back on the road, but I felt an overwhelming urge to help her. With a deep breath, I returned to my truck, the engine rumbling to life as I made my way back onto Highway 76. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of Sarah's presence. I thought about the shrine, about the photographs. I pulled out my phone and started researching. It didn't take long for me to find her story. Sarah had died in a tragic accident on this very highway decades ago. She had a family, her parents, siblings, and a fiancé. They must still be out there, living their lives while her memory faded into the past. I tracked down her family and eventually found an old address. I hesitated, but I couldn't ignore the pull to share Sarah's story. I knocked on the door, my heart racing. An elderly woman answered, her eyes lighting up with recognition as I told her about Sarah. Tears filled her eyes as she listened. "I thought we'd lost her forever," she whispered. We talked for hours, sharing memories and laughter, and I could see the light of recognition in her eyes. As I left, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. I glanced back at the house and noticed a flicker of light in the window. I smiled, knowing that Sarah was finally at peace. Driving back down Highway 76, the air felt different. The chill had lifted, and the shadows seemed less menacing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd done something right, something good. As I drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Sarah's ghost one last time. Instead, all I saw was the endless stretch of asphalt behind me and the promise of new stories waiting ahead. So, next time you find yourself driving through the night, be mindful of the whispers in the dark. There may be more than just the wind out there, waiting for someone to listen.
Story number 3.
A dark stretch of highway, the sound of tires rolling over asphalt fills the air. The camera focuses on a lone truck cruising through the night, headlights cutting through the fog. Voiceover begins, slow and deliberate. I've been driving trucks for over 15 years, covering thousands of miles across this country. But it was one night on Route 47 that would etch itself into my memory forever. A night when the road felt alive and something sinister lurked in the shadows. It was a chilly evening in November, and the clouds hung low in the sky, casting a dim light over the highway. I was hauling a load of heavy machinery, trying to reach my destination before dawn. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I drove deeper into the night, a heavy fog rolled in, thick and suffocating. I turned on my headlights, the beams cutting through the mist like knives, but the darkness seemed to close in around me. I squinted into the gloom, trying to spot anything unusual. That's when I saw her, a figure standing on the side of the road. A woman in a tattered dress, her hair hanging in wild tangles. She raised her arm, beckoning me to stop. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The ambient music becomes more eerie. I hesitated, knowing the stories. They say this part of Route 47 is haunted. Truckers whisper about the phantom woman who lures unsuspecting drivers to their doom. It said she was killed in a crash years ago, and now she wanders the road searching for someone to help her. Despite the dread pooling in my gut, I felt compelled to help. I rolled down the window. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my voice barely cutting through the thick fog. The woman didn't respond. She just continued to gesture toward the truck, her face obscured by shadows. I glanced at my GPS. It was a long way to the nearest rest stop. I can't leave her out there, I thought, feeling the weight of my conscience press down on me. I took a deep breath, gripping the wheel tightly, and pulled over. The truck groaned to a stop as I climbed out deck, the chill biting at my skin. "Ma'am, do you need help?" I asked, stepping closer. As I approached, the woman's face slowly emerged from the shadows. Her eyes were sunken and empty, and her skin appeared pale and translucent. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest. "What happened to you?" She pointed down the road, her voice a mere whisper. Help me, please. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear enveloping my mind. Where do you need to go? I managed to stammer. Just a little further, she said, her voice echoing like a distant wind. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew I should run back to my truck, but something held me in place. Curiosity, perhaps. Okay, I said, forcing myself to step closer. Get in. The moment she opened the door, a wave of cold washed over me. I glanced back at my truck, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows. I dismissed it and climbed back into the cab, glancing nervously at my passenger. As I started the engine, I stole a quick glance at her. She was now staring straight ahead, her face eerily calm. Just a little further, she repeated, her voice sending chills down my spine. The music becomes tense, building suspense. I drove on, my eyes glued to the road. With every mile, the fog thickened, and the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the shadows were alive, creeping closer, threatening to swallow me whole. Where are we going? I asked, my voice shaky. To my home, she replied, her gaze still fixed ahead. I nodded, trying to convince myself that I was helping someone in need. But deep down, a voice in my head screamed for me to turn back, to escape whatever this was. Just then, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. Another vehicle approaching, its headlights blinding in the thick fog. I squinted, trying to make it out, but it seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like a mirage. Who's that? I asked, panic rising in my chest. The woman turned to me, her eyes narrowing. Don't look back. I felt a jolt of fear as the headlights drew closer, illuminating the fog like a ghostly beacon. The figure in the vehicle seemed familiar, its outline resembling a truck. I swallowed hard, remembering the stories I'd heard on the road. Suddenly, the lights vanished, and an unnatural darkness enveloped us. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. What the hell? I shouted, panic clawing at my throat. Drive, she urged, her voice now sharp and demanding. I fumbled with the gear shift, heart racing as I struggled to regain control. The darkness pressed against the windows, suffocating and oppressive. It felt as if something was reaching out from the void, trying to pull me in. Keep driving. Don't stop, she shouted, and her tone sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I couldn't tell if she was trying to help or lead me to my doom. I tore down the road, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The shadows began to shift, and the fog swirled around us like a living entity. I glanced at her, her face now a mask of anger, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Turn back, I yelled, my mind racing as I fought to comprehend what was happening. No, you must help me, she screamed, her voice twisting into a haunting wail that echoed through the cab. The temperature dropped further, and I felt a presence pressing in on me, suffocating me. I can't do this, I yelled, swerving the truck as I struggled against the darkness. Just then, the headlights reappeared behind us, bright and blinding. I looked back and saw the shape of a large truck, its grille looming like a predator. I could see the driver's face, twisted in rage, mouth moving but no sound reaching my ears. Help me, she cried again, her voice now a terrifying shriek. No, I screamed, the weight of fear crashing down on me. In that moment, I slammed on the brakes, throwing the truck into a skid. The world around us blurred, and the darkness seemed to dissolve. I leaped from the cab, the truck spinning to a stop just inches from the edge of the road. The fog began to clear, and I turned to look back at the woman. She stood there, her figure fading into the mist, eyes filled with sorrow and rage. You left me, she whispered, her voice echoing in the silence. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as I watched her disappear into the fog, a fleeting memory of despair. The headlights of the phantom truck vanished, leaving only darkness in their wake. The camera pulls back, revealing the empty road under the eerie glow of the moon. I didn't get back in my truck that night. I stood there, trembling, knowing that I had crossed paths with something I couldn't comprehend. Now, every time I drive Route 47, I can still feel her presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next driver who dares to stop. The voiceover fades as the screen darkens. Story the end.
Story number 4.
It was late October, the nights growing colder, and the roads were beginning to fill with the haunting whispers of the season. My name is Jake, and I'm a trucker who spent countless hours alone on the highways, sharing the road with the ghosts of the past, both literal and metaphorical. But nothing could prepare me for the eerie encounter I had on a desolate stretch of Route 49 one fateful night. I was on my way to deliver a load of freight to a small town, a route I had taken many times before. The landscape was mostly barren, with only the occasional flicker of a farmhouse in the distance. My truck's headlights illuminated the asphalt ahead, casting long shadows that danced like phantoms in the night. I turned on the radio, but all I could find were static-filled channels, as if the airwaves were too afraid to share their secrets. As I drove, I noticed a figure standing by the roadside, shrouded in darkness. My heart raced. It was nearly midnight, and I hadn't seen another soul for miles. I slowed down, straining my eyes to see better. It was a young woman, dressed in a tattered white dress that fluttered in the cold wind. She stood there, her long hair blowing wildly, and her bare feet seemed to barely touch the ground. Instinctively, I reached for the door handle. "Are you okay?" I called out as I pulled up beside her. She looked at me with wide, haunting eyes, her expression a mix of desperation and fear. "Please, I need help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't just drive past her. "Get in," I urged, watching as she hesitated before climbing into the passenger seat. I noticed the cold air that seemed to envelop her, and a chill ran down my spine. As she settled in, the weight of her presence filled the cab, and the radio crackled back to life, playing a haunting melody that matched the eerie atmosphere. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "Just down the road," she replied, her gaze fixed out the window as if searching for something unseen. I glanced at her, and that's when I noticed the strange, ethereal glow surrounding her. "Are you lost?" I pressed. "What happened?" "I was on my way home. I took a wrong turn." Her voice trembled, and her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I don't know how I ended up here." The air in the truck grew colder, and I had to fight the urge to shiver. "What's your name?" I asked, hoping to make a connection. "Emily," she replied, barely meeting my gaze. "I just want to go home." I looked back at the road, my mind racing. "Where do you live, Emily?" I asked, hoping for a street name or a landmark. "Just a little further down this road," she murmured, her voice becoming softer, almost lost in the wind. As I drove on, the headlights illuminated the darkened landscape. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Emily, how did you end up out here alone?" I pressed, but she fell silent, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Suddenly, the truck jolted, and I felt a strange pressure in the air, as if something unseen was pressing down on us. The radio switched to an old song, a mournful tune that seemed to echo the sadness surrounding us. I stole a glance at her, and my stomach sank. Emily was staring straight ahead, her face pale and drawn, as if she were fading away. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. She didn't respond. Panic set in as I realized she wasn't just quiet. She was slipping from existence. "Emily!" I shouted, but she remained still, her eyes glassy and distant. I pressed my foot on the gas, desperate to get her to her destination, but the road seemed to stretch on endlessly. "Please, just tell me where to go," I urged, my heart racing. In response, the truck began to shake and the headlights flickered. I could feel the cold creeping into my bones, and I glanced at the dashboard. It was showing a warning light that had never appeared before. "Emily!" I yelled again, and she finally turned to me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You have to let me go," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I can't stay here." "What do you mean?" I asked, fear coursing through me. "You're not going anywhere." The sadness in her eyes deepened. "I'm not real. I died here years ago. You found me because I'm trapped in this place looking for someone to remember me." I felt my blood run cold. The realization hit me like a brick wall. "You're a ghost," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "Please, just let me go. Find my family. Tell them I'm still here," she said, her voice fading like a whisper in the wind. In that moment, I knew I had to help her. "I promise I'll find them," I vowed, my heart heavy with the weight of her story. The truck jolted again, and I felt the presence of something dark and powerful surrounding us, almost as if the road itself was trying to claim her. As we approached a crossroads, I saw a small signpost indicating the direction to a nearby town. "Is that where your family lives?" I asked, my voice trembling. She nodded, and I felt a rush of determination. "All right, let's get you home," I said, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The truck's engine roared to life as I accelerated toward the town, and the atmosphere began to shift. The air grew warmer, and the flickering light of the headlights illuminated the road ahead. In that moment, Emily began to fade, her form growing translucent. "Thank you, Jake," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "I'll finally be free." As we approached the town, I spotted a small house at the end of the street. It looked familiar, a place where I could imagine a family waiting for her return. "Is this it?" I asked, my heart racing. She smiled, a radiant expression that lit up her fading features. Yes, thank you. And just like that, she was gone. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest as I looked around. The air felt lighter, and the darkness that had surrounded me seemed to lift. I took a deep breath, knowing I had fulfilled my promise. I parked the truck and stepped out, feeling the cool night air against my skin. I walked toward the house, heart racing with anticipation. As I knocked on the door, I could hear the faint sound of laughter inside, like the echoes of a family who had long missed their daughter. An elderly couple answered the door, surprise written across their faces as they looked at me. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "I'm here about Emily," I said, my voice shaking. "She's been looking for you." The couple's expressions turned somber as I shared her story, watching as tears filled their eyes. They invited me in, and we spoke late into the night, sharing memories of their beloved daughter. As I left, I felt a warmth in my heart, knowing that Emily was finally at peace. As I climbed back into my truck, the night felt different, lighter somehow. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her, but the road was empty, just me and the promise of new journeys ahead. I took a deep breath and drove on, forever changed by the phantom hitchhiker who had touched my soul. Story the end.
Story number 5.
It was a night like any other on the open road. My name is Tom, a long-haul trucker who had spent years crisscrossing the country. I was used to the solitude, the endless stretches of asphalt lit only by the glow of my headlights. However, this particular night in early November felt different. The air was thick with an unsettling chill, and a heavy fog had settled over Highway 81, swallowing everything in its grasp. As I drove, the radio flickered through a few channels, mostly static and garbled voices. I finally landed on an old blues station, the soulful guitar strumming setting a somber mood. The headlights sliced through the fog, illuminating the dark silhouette of pine trees lining the road. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. About halfway through my shift, I came across a fork in the road, a sign that read, "Lost Creek Cabin," pointing to the left. I had never seen this road before, but something about it piqued my curiosity. I decided to take a detour, thinking a quick break would do me good. I turned down the road, the gravel crunching under my tires as I drove deeper into the woods. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. The further I went, the thicker the fog became. It felt as if I had entered a different world, one where time stood still. After several minutes, I spotted a wooden sign that read, "Lost Creek Cabin, 2 miles." A sense of unease washed over me, but I pressed on, hoping to find a cozy cabin and perhaps a hot cup of coffee. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw it. A small, dilapidated cabin nestled between the trees. The place looked ancient, vines crawling up its sides, and the windows were fogged over, obscuring whatever lay inside. I parked the truck, stepping out into the biting cold. The cabin seemed alive, almost as if it were breathing, and I felt an inexplicable urge to explore. As I approached the door, I noticed the hinges were rusty and the wood creaked ominously. I pushed it open, and it groaned in protest, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with dust and shadows. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around the room. Old furniture was scattered about, covered in white sheets that looked like ghostly figures. A fireplace stood cold and empty, its stone mantle filled with strange carvings that seemed to twist and writhe in the flickering light. On the wall hung old photographs, their frames cracked and broken, depicting families long gone, smiling faces frozen in time. As I examined the pictures, a chill ran down my spine. One photograph caught my eye, a family standing in front of the cabin, their faces filled with joy. But there was something off about the woman in the middle. Her eyes seemed too dark, too hollow, as if she were a shell of her former self. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the cabin, startling me. I turned, heart pounding, and shouted, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence answered me. The sense of dread grew, but I fought the urge to flee. I wanted to prove to myself that I was brave, that I could handle anything the road threw at me. I crept toward the back of the cabin, flashlight in hand, illuminating the dark corners filled with shadows. As I approached a closed door, the air grew colder. I reached out to turn the handle, but before I could, the door swung open on its own, revealing a dark, narrow hallway lined with more photographs, each one more disturbing than the last. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on me. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I moved cautiously, glancing at the photographs hanging on the walls. The family in each picture seemed to change with every passing year, their smiles fading into grimaces of despair. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Help me." It seemed to come from the end of the hallway, urging me forward. My heart raced, and the instinct to run bubbled beneath the surface. But again, curiosity overpowered my fear. I had to know what was happening. I reached the end of the hallway, where the darkness felt almost tangible. A door stood ajar, and I pushed it open with trembling hands. The room inside was small and cluttered, filled with old furniture and what looked like a child's toys strewn across the floor. In the corner, I saw a rocking chair swaying gently back and forth as if someone had just been sitting there. "Help me!" The voice echoed again, this time clearer, more insistent. I scanned the room, looking for the source, and my heart sank as I noticed a figure in the corner, an apparition of a woman, her features blurred and indistinct, but her eyes locked onto mine. They were the same dark, hollow eyes from the photograph. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm lost. I can't find my way home," she said, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "I've been trapped here for so long." A rush of pity washed over me. "What happened to you?" "I was taken by the darkness. This cabin holds my soul captive. You must help me find peace. Tell my family I'm still here. They must remember me," she implored, her form flickering like a dying flame. Suddenly, the air grew heavier, and the shadows around her twisted, coiling like snakes. "You can't leave," a deep voice boomed from the darkness. I turned, and a dark figure emerged from the shadows, its presence suffocating. It had no form, just an absence of light, and it loomed over the woman. "No!" I shouted, my heart racing. "Leave her alone!" The dark figure hissed, and the room began to swirl around me. I stumbled backward, my instincts screaming at me to run, but I knew I couldn't abandon her. "What do I need to do?" I shouted over the chaos. "Find my family! Free me from this place!" she cried, her voice becoming frantic as the dark figure closed in. I turned and bolted down the hallways, the air heavy and thick around me. The photographs on the walls seemed to come alive, their faces twisting in pain and sorrow as I passed. I burst through the front door, gasping for breath, feeling the cool night air wrap around me like a lifeline. I raced to my truck, jumping inside and slamming the door. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, finally starting the engine with a roar. I glanced back at the cabin, the darkness enveloping it like a shroud. I knew I had to find her family, to give her the peace she so desperately sought. As I sped away, the fog began to lift, and the road ahead cleared. I felt the weight of the darkness fade, but the urgency in my chest remained. I pulled over at the nearest gas station, my heart racing as I searched online for information about the family in the photographs. Hours passed as I gathered everything I could find. I learned that the woman's name was Clara, and she had disappeared decades ago. After a frantic search, I discovered that her family still lived in the nearby town, still holding on to the hope that she might return. When I finally reached her family's home, I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. An elderly couple answered, their faces etched with years of sorrow. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her eyes filled with curiosity and fear. "I'm here about Clara," I said, my voice shaking. "She's been trying to reach you." I shared her story, watching as the couple's expressions shifted from confusion to shock and finally to tears. After hours of reminiscing and sharing memories, I felt a warmth in my heart, knowing I had helped Clara find peace. As I left, I glanced back at the couple, who were now smiling through their tears, the burden of loss beginning to lift. Driving away, I felt lighter, free from the weight of the cabin's darkness. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Clara's spirit smiling back at me. But the road was empty, just me and the promise of new stories waiting to be written. The lesson lingered in my mind. Not all ghosts haunt out of malice. Some are simply lost, waiting for someone to help them find their way home. Story the end.
Story number 6.
My name is Mark, and I've been a truck driver for over a decade. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, but nothing prepared me for the chilling encounter I had on a cold night last December. It was around 2 a.m., and I was making my way down a desolate stretch of Route 66, the iconic highway that had seen countless travelers come and go over the years. The headlights of my rig cut through the thick darkness, illuminating the cracked pavement ahead. The radio played soft classic rock, the sound crackling intermittently, like whispers from another time. I felt the weight of solitude pressing down on me as the endless road unfolded, seemingly unchanging and eternal. As I drove, I noticed something unusual up ahead, a flickering light near the edge of the road. Curiosity piqued. I slowed down. I figured it was probably just a broken down car or maybe someone needing assistance. But as I got closer, I realized it was a solitary figure standing by the roadside, a woman in a long white dress. I pulled over, my heart racing. "Hey there, do you need help?" I called out, hoping she could hear me over the sound of the truck idling. The woman turned slowly, her long hair cascading down her back, and I felt an unsettling chill race down my spine. Her face was pale, almost luminescent, and her eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. "Please, I need a ride," she said, her voice soft yet filled with an urgency that made my skin crawl. I hesitated for a moment, the stories I'd heard about hitchhikers flashing through my mind, but something in her gaze compelled me to open the door. "Get in," I said, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. She slid into the passenger seat, her presence almost ethereal. "Thank you," she whispered, staring straight ahead as if lost in thought. I glanced at her, trying to gauge her situation. "Where are you headed?" I asked, attempting to make conversation and ease the tension in the air. "Just take me home," she replied, her voice distant. "I've been waiting for so long." I nodded, trying to keep my focus on the road. As I drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The atmosphere in the truck felt heavy, and the air grew colder. I turned on the heat, but it didn't help. The radio, which had been playing classic rock, suddenly switched to an old-timey station, the music crackling as if it were coming from a different era. "Do you have a family?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. She turned her head slowly to look at me, and I felt a jolt of fear. Her eyes were filled with a deep sadness that seemed to transcend time. "Yes," she whispered, "but they don't know I'm here." "Where's home?" I pressed, trying to get her to talk. "Just a little further down the road," she murmured. "You'll see it soon." As I continued driving, the landscape around us began to change. The asphalt stretched out like a long, dark ribbon, with the trees closing in around us. The flickering light of the dashboard cast eerie shadows on her face, and I noticed a faint glow emanating from her. Suddenly, the radio switched again, this time to a haunting melody. The woman's expression shifted, her eyes glazing over as she seemed to drift into another world. "They're calling for me," she said, almost in a trance. "I have to go home." A rush of anxiety surged through me. "What do you mean? Where are you going?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Home," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, and as she said it, I felt the temperature drop further. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking behind us, but the road remained empty and silent. "Listen, maybe I should take you to the nearest town instead," I suggested, feeling an overwhelming urge to get away from whatever was happening. But she shook her head slowly, her gaze fixed on the dark road ahead. "No, it's too late for that. I can't leave. I've been waiting for years." Panic gripped me as the fog thickened outside, swirling around the truck like a living entity. I fought to keep my focus on the road, but it felt like we were being pulled into the depths of the darkness. "What happened to you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned to me, and I felt a deep chill run through my bones as she revealed the truth. "I died here a long time ago. This road is where I lost everything." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, though I dreaded her response. "I was driving home one night. My car broke down just a few miles from here. I was hit by a truck while I waited for help," she said, her voice breaking. "Now I'm trapped, forever wandering this road." A wave of dread washed over me as I realized the gravity of her words. I was driving with a ghost, a spirit seeking closure. "How can I help you?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Just take me home," she pleaded, her eyes welling with tears. "Tell my family I'm still here. I need them to know." I felt a knot form in my stomach, knowing I had to confront this haunting truth. "Where's home?" I asked, and she pointed ahead, her finger trembling as she whispered, "Just a little further." As we drove on, I could feel the atmosphere shifting, the fog closing in like a shroud. I squinted through the windshield, searching for any signs of civilization. "I can't see anything," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "Keep going," she urged, her voice now urgent. "You're almost there." Suddenly, I spotted a dilapidated house in the distance, shrouded in shadows. It looked ancient, with vines creeping up its sides, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim it. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes, that's my home," she cried, her eyes widening with hope. I pulled up in front of the house, my heart racing. The air was electric, charged with a strange energy as she opened the door. "Thank you," she whispered, her face glowing with relief. Before I could respond, she turned and began to walk toward the house. I watched, my heart pounding as she moved closer to the door. But as she reached out to touch the doorknob, she paused, looking back at me with a serene smile. "Tell them I love them," she said, her voice echoing in the night. Then, in an instant, she vanished, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air where she once stood. I sat there in stunned silence, feeling the weight of her absence settle over me. The house loomed before me, dark and foreboding, and I knew I had to tell her family what had happened. I stepped out of the truck, my legs shaky, and walked up to the front door, knocking hesitantly. An elderly woman answered, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here about your daughter," I stammered. Tears filled her eyes as she listened to my story, and I watched as hope and sorrow intermingled on her face. "I knew she was still with us," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. I left the house, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I climbed back into my truck and took a deep breath, the weight of the encounter lifting as I drove away. The fog began to clear, and the road ahead was illuminated by the light of dawn breaking on the horizon. As I drove on, I felt grateful for the experience, knowing I had helped a lost soul find her way home. The highway stretched before me, endless and inviting, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose as I returned to the open road. Story, the end.
Story number 7.
My name is Jake, and I've been a long-haul truck driver for over 15 years. I've traversed nearly every road in this country, but one night I encountered something that would haunt me forever. It was a cold winter evening, and I had just finished my delivery in Denver. I was headed back to Texas, where I called home. As I cruised down the lonely stretch of Interstate 10, the clock ticked past midnight. My rig's headlights cut through the thick fog that had rolled in, the world around me reduced to mere shadows. I turned up the radio, trying to drown out the silence that felt like it was creeping into my mind. A country song played softly, the kind that reminds you of long-forgotten memories. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, standing at the roadside. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. As I got closer, I saw it was a woman, her hair billowing in the cold wind, wearing a tattered dress. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It was late, and I knew better than to pick up hitchhikers, but something about her seemed off, like she was lost and desperate. I slowed down, my heart racing. "Hey, do you need a ride?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. She turned to face me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Yes, please," she exclaimed, her voice shaky. I opened the passenger door, and she climbed in without a second thought. As soon as she settled into the seat, the chill in the air seemed to intensify, making me shiver. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going to mask my unease. "Sarah," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for stopping. I didn't think anyone would." "No problem, Sarah. Where are you headed?" "Just take me to the nearest town," she said, staring out the window. I glanced at her, and my stomach dropped. Her expression was distant, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the dark highway. "Sure thing," I said, trying to sound casual. As I drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The atmosphere in the truck felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. I turned on the radio, hoping to break the silence, but it only added to my unease. The music crackled, transitioning from country to an oldies station, playing a haunting ballad that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Do you like this song?" I asked, attempting to lighten the mood. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked over at her again, and for a moment the glow of the headlights illuminated her face, revealing a hollow, almost spectral quality to her features. "Are you okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. "I'm fine," she replied, though there was a tremor in her tone that suggested otherwise. Minutes passed, and as I drove, I started to notice the road signs indicating I was nearing a small town. But as I approached, something felt wrong. The lights of the town flickered in and out like dying fireflies, and an eerie stillness hung in the air. "Are you sure this is where you want to go?" I asked, glancing at her. "Yes," she replied firmly. "It's the only place I know." I parked near the edge of the town, and as I turned off the engine, a sense of dread washed over me. The lights of the town flickered again, and I noticed shadows moving in the distance. It was as if the town itself was alive, breathing with secrets. "Here we are," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Are you sure you're okay?" She turned to me, her eyes filled with an inexplicable sadness. "I've been waiting for so long," she said, her voice trailing off. "Waiting for what?" I asked, unable to hide my fear. "Waiting for someone to remember me," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Before I could respond, she opened the door and stepped out into the night. "Wait!" I shouted, but she was already walking away, her figure slowly disappearing into the darkness. I sat in the truck, torn between the urge to follow her and the instinct to flee. My gut told me something was wrong, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. I finally gathered enough courage to step out, and as I walked toward where she had gone, I could hear a faint melody, a mournful tune carried by the wind. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice echoing into the void. The shadows danced around me, and the air felt thick with tension. "Where are you?" I followed the sound of her voice, which was now mingled with whispers. The town felt surreal, as if I had stepped into a forgotten dream. The buildings stood like sentinels, their windows dark and empty. As I wandered deeper, the air turned icy, and a chilling realization washed over me. I was no longer alone. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, ghostly silhouettes drifting through the streets. They wore expressions of anguish, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted in despair. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. "Help us," they murmured in unison, their voices blending into a haunting chorus. I turned to flee, but the shadows closed in around me, enveloping me in darkness. "Sarah!" I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the night. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grasp my arm, and I turned to find Sarah standing beside me, her expression one of sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why? What's happening?" I demanded, panic rising within me. "This town, it's cursed," she explained, her eyes glistening with tears. "We're all trapped here. I thought you could help me find peace." "Peace?" I echoed, my voice shaking. "What do you mean?" "I died in a car accident near here, just like many others," she said, gesturing to the figures surrounding us. "We've been waiting for someone to remember us, to tell our stories." I felt a wave of compassion wash over me, realizing that these souls were not malicious, but lost, desperate for closure. "I'll help you," I promised, feeling a surge of determination. "I'll tell your stories." As I spoke those words, a strange energy filled the air, and the ghostly figures began to shimmer. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice filled with hope. Tell them we loved and lived, but we were taken too soon." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, and when I opened them, the shadows began to dissolve. I could feel the weight of their anguish lifting, their faces relaxing into serene expressions. I watched in awe as they began to fade away, their forms dissolving into the night. "Thank you," Sarah whispered one last time, and just like that, she vanished, leaving behind a gentle warmth in the air. The town around me transformed, the shadows receding and the flickering lights stabilized into a soft glow. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, and I knew I had done what they had asked. I returned to my truck, heart still racing, but filled with a newfound clarity. As I drove away from that cursed place, the night felt lighter, and I made a promise to myself to share their stories, to keep their memories alive. From that day forward, whenever I traveled along the highways, I would remember Sarah and the lost souls of that small town. They were no longer trapped in the shadows. They had found their peace, and I was honored to have played a part in their journey. Story the end.
Story number 8.
My name is Tom, and I've been a truck driver for more than a decade. I've driven through every state and everything from blizzards to broken down rigs, but nothing could prepare me for the night I encountered something truly terrifying on a stretch of road known as Dead Man's Curve. It was late October, just past midnight, when I found myself on a desolate stretch of Highway 49, a road infamous among drivers for its sharp turns and treacherous terrain. The air was thick with fog, and I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My headlights barely pierced through the mist, illuminating only shadows that danced along the roadside. As I rounded one of the sharper curves, I caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a flickering light that seemed to beckon me. Curiosity piqued. I slowed my rig, pulling over to the side of the road. I rolled down my window, straining to see through the thick fog. "Hello?" I called out, but the only response was the haunting whisper of the wind. I glanced at my GPS. No signal. This stretch of road felt isolated, almost forgotten by time. The light flickered again, drawing me in. I stepped out of the truck, the chill of the night air biting at my skin. As I approached the source of the light, I realized it was an old-fashioned lantern, flickering weakly against the darkness. It hung from a weathered post, rusted and bent, standing alone in the fog. Just as I reached out to touch it, I heard a voice, soft yet filled with an urgency that sent a shiver down my spine. "Help me, please." I turned, and there she was, a woman standing a few feet away. Her hair was long and disheveled, and she wore a flowing white dress that seemed to glow in the dark. But something about her eyes sent a chill through me. They were filled with sorrow and desperation. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I crashed my car," she said, her voice trembling. "I was coming home from a party, and I lost control on this curve." She pointed to the edge of the road where the fog thickened ominously. "I need you to help me find my way home." I took a step back, a mixture of fear and compassion swelling within me. "What's your name?" I asked. "Emily," she whispered, her gaze piercing into mine. "I've been waiting here for so long. The road, it's taken so many of us." The pit in my stomach deepened. I had heard the rumors about Dead Man's Curve, about how it was haunted by the spirits of those who had lost their lives in accidents over the years. But standing in front of Emily, I felt an overwhelming urge to help. "Okay, Emily," I said, trying to muster my courage. "I'll help you. Just tell me what I need to do." "Drive me home," she replied, her eyes glistening. "I'll show you the way." I hesitated, but found myself nodding, feeling a strange compulsion to assist her. We walked back to the truck, and as I opened the door, a wave of unease washed over me. I glanced at her, and she seemed so fragile, so lost. As we drove along the winding road, Emily sat quietly beside me, her eyes fixed on the dark expanse ahead. I kept stealing glances at her, the fog swirling around us like a living entity. "Where do you live?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Just a few miles down the road," she replied, her voice soft yet firm. "You'll know it when you see it." We continued down the road, the atmosphere thickening with tension. The radio flickered on, an oldies station playing a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. Emily's expression remained distant, as if she was in a trance. "Are you okay?" I asked, concern creeping into my voice. "I've just been waiting for so long," she whispered. "So many lives have been lost on this road. It's not just me. They're all still here." A chill swept through the cab, and I felt a rush of fear. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "The curve, it calls to those who have left us," she explained, her voice trembling. "We're trapped here, wandering until someone remembers us." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of her words. "I'll remember you," I promised, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll tell your story." As we approached another curve, I felt a sense of unease growing. The headlights flickered as if responding to an unseen force. Suddenly, the fog thickened, and I could barely see. "Hold on!" I shouted, gripping the wheel tighter. Just then, the truck lurched, and I struggled to regain control. The road twisted dangerously, and I could hear the faint echoes of laughter, cries, and whispers flooding the air. My heart raced as I glanced over at Emily, her eyes wide with "Look out!" she screamed. Before I could react, the truck skidded on the slick asphalt. I felt the tires lose grip, and for a moment, everything slowed down. I braced for impact, my heart pounding in my chest. The world around us dissolved into a blur of lights and sounds. I fought to regain control, my instincts kicking in. "Hold on," I shouted, fighting against the forces pulling us into the abyss. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and then darkness enveloped us. I felt the truck come to a stop, and I gasped for breath, my heart racing. When I opened my eyes, I was still sitting in the driver's seat, the engine idling quietly. But Emily was gone. The air was heavy with silence, and the fog had dissipated, revealing the quiet stretch of road. "Emily?" I called out, panic rising in my throat. I stepped out of the truck, trembling. "Where are you?" I looked around, my heart pounding. I was back at the edge of Dead Man's Curve, the lantern still flickering beside the road. I could see the outlines of old gravestones nearby, half buried in the weeds. The realization hit me like a wave. She wasn't just lost. She was a spirit, trapped between worlds. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. "I'm sorry!" I shouted into the darkness, my voice echoing. "I'm so sorry!" Suddenly, a cool breeze swept through the area, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. In that moment, I understood what I needed to do. I had to share their stories, to keep their memories alive. I climbed back into my truck, my heart heavy but resolved. As I drove away from Dead Man's Curve, I promised myself that I would tell Emily's story, and the stories of all those who had been lost on that cursed road. With each mile I drove, I felt a sense of peace settling in. I would remember them. I would keep their memories alive, ensuring they would never be forgotten. As I turned on the radio, the haunting melody played once more, and I knew that in some way, Emily was with me. I drove on, the road ahead stretching out like a promise filled with hope and remembrance. Story the end.
Story number 9.
I'm Mike, a truck driver with years of experience on the road. I've seen some strange things in my time, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I encountered the specter of the lonesome highway. It was late November, and I was hauling a load from Albuquerque to Nashville. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the highway shrouded in darkness. My truck's headlights pierced through the thick night, illuminating the endless stretch of asphalt ahead. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the road wearing on me when I noticed the temperature drop significantly. It was then that I saw her, a figure standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a mirage, a trick of the mind born from fatigue. But as I drew closer, the image sharpened into focus. A young woman in a long white dress, her hair billowing in the wind. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement. "Hey, do you need a ride?" I called out, the worry for her safety overpowering my instinct to drive away. She turned to face me, her eyes wide and shimmering under the glow of my headlights. "Please, I need your help," she cried, her voice echoing through the stillness of the night. I hesitated for a moment, recalling the tales I'd heard about hitchhikers, stories of lost souls and spirits wandering the highways. But the urgency in her voice compelled me. "Get in," I said, opening the passenger door. As she climbed into the cab, I could see that her face was pale, her hands trembling. "What happened?" I asked, trying to gauge her situation. "I was in an accident," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to get home." "Where's home?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Just a few miles down the road," she replied, looking out the window, her gaze lost in the darkness. I turned the truck back onto the highway, the engine rumbling beneath us. As we drove, the atmosphere grew heavy, thick with an unshakable tension. The radio crackled, switching from station to station until it landed on an eerie tune that seemed to echo through the cabin. "Do you like this song?" I asked, attempting to lighten the mood. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice distant, almost as if she were lost in thought. Minutes passed in silence, and I glanced over at her. Her expression was one of sorrow, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to connect. "Emily," she replied softly, turning to face me. "Thank you for stopping. I didn't think anyone would." As we continued down the road, I noticed that the landscape around us began to change. The trees seemed to loom larger, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching out to the sky. The air grew colder, and the fog rolled in thicker, shrouding the highway in a ghostly veil. "Are you okay?" I asked, stealing another glance at her. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice trembled. "I just wish I could go home." As we approached a bend in the road, I saw a faint glow in the distance. It resembled the lights of a house, and my heart raced at the thought of getting her to safety. "Is that your home?" I asked, pointing ahead. "Yes, that's it!" she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "Just a little further." I pressed the accelerator, my excitement building. But as we rounded the bend, the glow vanished, swallowed by the thickening fog. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. "What just happened?" "Keep going," she urged, her voice growing frantic. It's right the wheel sharply, the truck skidding slightly. "Emily, I can't see anything!" "It's there! It has to be there!" she cried, her desperation cutting through the air like a knife. Just then, the radio crackled again, and a voice came through. Faint but unmistakable. "Help us," it whispered, echoing in the cab. I looked at Emily, fear creeping into my chest. "What's happening?" Her expression changed, a flicker of recognition mixed with dread crossing her face. "They're here," she said, her voice trembling. "They're always here." Before I could respond, the temperature dropped sharply, and the fog thickened, wrapping around the truck like a shroud. Shadows danced outside the windows, swirling in the darkness, and I could hear whispers echoing through the air. "Help us! Help us!" they chanted, a haunting chorus that sent chills racing down my spine. "Emily!" I shouted, panic surging through me. "What do they want?" "I don't know," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "They're lost, just like me." Suddenly, the truck lurched violently, as if something had collided with us. I fought to maintain control, my heart racing as the shadows pressed closer, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand. "Hold on," I shouted, gripping the steering wheel as we veered dangerously close to the edge of the road. "We need to get out of here." In that moment, I remembered the stories, the legends of the lonesome highway, of spirits bound to the road, searching for help to escape their torment. I needed to break free, to get Emily to safety. "Emily!" I yelled, desperation lacing my voice. "You have to tell them you're ready to move on. You have to say it." She looked at me, her expression shifting from fear to understanding. "You're right," she said, her voice steadier now. "I need to let go." As the truck swayed, I felt a surge of energy in the air. The whispers grew louder, surrounding us, filling the cab with a cacophony of voices. "Help us! Help us! Emily, say it!" I urged, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm ready to move on," she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. "I'm ready to be free." In that instant, the air shifted. The shadows recoiled, the whispers fading into the night. The fog began to lift, and the weight pressing down on us lightened. I could see the road ahead, clearer than ever. "Let's go," I shouted, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward, breaking free from the spectral grasp of the highway. As we drove, the landscape transformed. The trees became clearer, the road stretching out before us, illuminated by the moonlight. I glanced over at Emily, and for the first time, I saw a smile on her face, a look of peace and relief. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for helping me." "No problem," I replied, my heart racing. "Just get home safe." As we approached a familiar intersection, I turned to ask her where to go next, but when I looked over, the passenger seat was empty. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized Emily was gone. But somehow, I knew she had found her peace. I continued driving, the darkness behind me receding. The highway felt different now, less threatening, almost serene. As I reached the outskirts of a town, I spotted a diner with a neon sign flickering in the night. I pulled in, needing to collect my thoughts. The waitress greeted me with a smile, but I could see her eyes darting to the empty seat beside me. "Are you all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Yeah," I replied, swallowing hard. "Just a long night on the road." As I sipped my coffee, I made a silent promise to Emily and all the lost souls of the lonesome highway. I would share their stories, keep their memories alive, ensuring they would never be forgotten. And as I stared out the window at the road stretching into the horizon, I felt a sense of hope and peace, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, there's always a light waiting to guide us home. Story the end.
Story number 10.
I'm Jake, a long-haul truck driver. I've seen my fair share of strange sights on the road, but none as eerie as what happened one fateful night at a seemingly abandoned truck stop. It was a late autumn evening around 2 a.m., and I was cruising along Interstate 75, my eyes heavy with fatigue. The monotony of the highway stretched before me like an endless ribbon of darkness, and I knew I needed to pull over soon. As I glanced at my fuel gauge, I spotted a flickering neon sign in the distance, a truck stop that had seen better days. It read, "Rest Stop, open 24/7, the 7 flickering ominously. With a sigh of relief, I took the exit, grateful for the chance to stretch my legs and grab a cup of coffee. As I pulled into the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The lot was nearly empty, with only a few trucks parked under the flickering lights. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the distant sound of crickets. I stepped out of my rig, the cold air biting at my skin. The truck stop's exterior was old and worn, paint peeling from the walls. A shiver ran down my spine as I approached the entrance, the door creaking eerily as I pushed it open. Inside, the diner was dimly lit, with a few scattered tables and a long counter. An ancient jukebox sat in the corner, playing a haunting tune that seemed to echo through the empty space. I approached the counter, and a woman behind it turned to me, her smile warm, yet oddly unsettling. "Welcome, Han. What can I get for you?" she said, her voice smooth like honey. "I'll just have a coffee, please," I replied, my instincts on high alert. She poured a cup and slid it across the counter, her eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than comfortable. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No, just passing through," I said, taking the coffee. As I sipped the hot liquid, I noticed the diner's walls were adorned with faded photographs, pictures of truck drivers and families from years gone by. Their faces seemed frozen in time, a haunting reminder of lives once lived. "Do you get many customers here?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. "Not as many as we used to," she said, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. "This place has seen better days." I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Is it always this quiet?" She looked at me, her expression shifting slightly. "Sometimes the quiet can be deafening." As I finished my coffee, I felt the urge to stretch my legs. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, placing a few bills on the counter. "I'll be on my way." But as I turned to leave, the jukebox suddenly switched to a different song, a slow, mournful ballad that echoed through the diner. The woman's gaze turned distant, and she leaned against the counter, lost in thought. Wait, I said, curiosity getting the better of me. What's that song about? It's about longing, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, about not being able to leave what's behind. A shiver ran through me, and I took a step back, feeling a strange sense of foreboding. Right, I should really get going. As I exited the diner, I noticed a group of truckers gathered outside, huddled around a small fire pit. They looked up as I approached, their faces gaunt and tired. Hey, man, you just come from the diner? One of them asked, his voice gravelly. Yeah, I replied, glancing back at the diner, which now seemed even more ominous. What's the deal with this place? The trucker exchanged a wary look with his companions before leaning closer. You didn't hear the stories? This truck stop is cursed. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite myself. Cursed? Yeah, he continued, his voice low. People say it's haunted. Drivers who come here, they don't always leave. My heart raced as he spoke, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. What do you mean? There was an accident a few years back. A trucker fell asleep at the wheel and crashed right in front of this place. Ever since then, people have reported strange occurrences. Sometimes they hear voices calling to them, or they see shadows moving in the corners of their eyes. I glanced over my shoulder at the diner, the warm lights now flickering menacingly. You're kidding, right? Dead serious, man, the trucker replied, his eyes dark. Just last week, a guy came in, ordered a coffee, and vanished. No one saw him leave. The waitress just smiled and went back to cleaning. A wave of dread washed over me. I remembered the woman behind the counter, her unsettling smile and cryptic words. What's her story? The trucker sighed, shaking his head. No one knows. She's been here forever. Some say she's the ghost of the waitress who served that driver who never made it home. I took a step back, my heart racing. I think I need to go. As I turned to leave, the air around me felt heavy, almost suffocating. The flickering lights cast strange shadows, and I could hear whispers echoing through the lot, the voices of lost souls calling out in the night. Help us! Help us! I quickened my pace, rushing back to my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking as I climbed into the cab. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the door shut, locking it tight. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The diner loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the night sky. The woman stood in the doorway, watching me leave, her smile still present, but now tinged with something more sinister. I drove down the highway, my heart racing as the whispers faded into the distance. I was finally free, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the truck stop would always haunt me. The miles stretched on, and the darkness enveloped me. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but the memory of that cursed truck stop lingered in my mind. I glanced down at the coffee cup still sitting in my cup holder, the remnants of a drink that felt like a warning. From that day on, I told my fellow truckers to steer clear of the lonesome highway and its haunted truck stop. Some may call me superstitious, but I know what I experienced that night was all too real. And as I continued my journey down the open road, I could still hear the echoes of lost souls whispering in the wind, a reminder of the darkness that lurked in the shadows of the highway. Story the end.